talking.
I was like, yeah.
Test, test. Hello, hello. Welcome to Index. My name is Sky. I'm a studio assistant here. We're very excited to host this special conversation between Louis Prosser, Sarita Westrup, and Janet Koplos. They will introduce themselves in a moment, but before we begin, I wanted to welcome you all into the space. We have bathrooms on the right-hand side and water available at this table near the windows. If you have any questions about Index Space, feel free to talk to me after the program. Thank you.
We're going to try not using the stuff eating and implement, but if that doesn't go, okay. I would say first of all, I'm working looking at Contemporary Basketry. That was just recently published by Edward, who does a blog called Contemporary Basketry. And I wrote a little essay for it. But if you haven't seen that blog and you're interested in that, you have gorgeous pictures of work from around the world, ranging from miniature type baskets, architectural structures that you can walk into. And the fact that neither of our guests today are in the book is sort of embarrassing, but on the other hand, it's a measure of the richness of this field. There is so much good work that it is staggeringly difficult to try to cut this down to just 60 people representing basketry that's done around the world. So, with that introduction, I would also say that I get into journalism more than anything else, and so I'm not going to ask really clear questions about art jogging. We're just going to talk about their development, their discovery of basketry, and I would love to thinking that and just an ordinary conversation about what's fun. So the first question, I think all you want to know what the history then is in the media. Some of you is okay, so maybe the first thing to ask each of you is, just don't talk about your ideas. Just talk about where you're from and how long you've been working and that kind of data. Okay.
Hello, I'm Lewis. I'm a basket maker and artist. I'm based in Wales, in the UK. I'm from Worcester, so sort of border on the southwest in Wales. And I've worked with very traditional words helping us and trying to put them into a sort of contemporary context. That's it. I've only been living for 5 years, but it's been a very intense 5 years, as you can probably tell. But it's I'm very close to Westrup, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of access to networking around music. So it's been an easier process to learn this.
And hi, I'm Sarita Westrup. I'm originally from the South Texas, a border town called McAllen, and I'm now working in North Carolina. I identify as a sculptural basket maker, and I mostly work with reed and mortar and paints, natural dye inks, and really kind of been working, I suppose, now for 13 years, and a lot of my basket mothers are from your foot. Because that's my background.
Okay, well, why don't you both tell us how you discovered the basketry, when it jumped out at you someplace and you thought about doing it for yourself?
For me, I was weaving on the loom first, and I've been doing that for a few years, and after a while, I needed to ditch it. I was like, this is expensive. This is not like, I don't need this equipment in my life. And being Mexican American, I really wanted to bring more kind of objects into the work. And that's really just ignited me and things from like my physical environment. And so I felt like off the loom structures and basketry offered that opportunity to me in my room.
So when you were reading, only it was 2D.
It was 2D, and I was just like, this is not doing anything for me, you know? And when I first experienced working with wood and working around, I was like, oh yeah, this is where I need to go. The University of North Texas, right outside Dallas, Texas.
Does it kind of, I don't know, do they have that?
We had a fiber exposure, and so I went there to learn how to weave because I saw it on television one time. And being from border town, I'm Mexican American, weaving and woven cloth was a part of the textural experience of growing up. So I really wanted to learn, but then it just sculpture and basket weaving was really what stuck.
How about gasket forms and your workstation? Yes.
Well, first, Castle Contemporary Basketry. Oh my goodness. I would say, actually, like we were talking about this, Louis and I, about like anytime somebody touches one of these baskets, they have a basket memory. And for me, it was not necessarily cultural, but just that we had so much. My mother had intended for rattan furniture, and it was around everywhere when I was growing up. So maybe that was something that was part of my desire to connect with the structure. Yeah.
I sort of discovered basketing through a process of trying to embody craft a little bit more in a solo way. I was pretty much there for years, and I guess that relies on access to other people's tools and materials and workshops. And then you sort of have all that taken away with you from you during the pandemic, or these sort of things where actually I needed a craft where I could do something with my hands that was purely with the materials I could gather myself. So it was all within distance of my house, you know, that kind of stuff.
So you go out into the
I did. That's how I learned originally. So it was very much about like a local practice, but and then as I learned more, I sort of became plugged into a broader sort of industry of basketry, and one of the big things that really inspired me in learning was that there's a Heritage Crafts Association in the UK, which is all about crafts that are now becoming endangered because they're falling out of written knowledge. There's no people actually producing these arts anymore, and they produce a specific report on plastic designers that were in danger of being completely killed. Maybe not maybe. So they're all regional throughout the UK. And I had just moved from Scotland back down to Southwest, and for me it was like so many of these things have suddenly in my identity. And I was like, oh, I can connect my personal journey through and around the UK to these actual physical objects. So I was like, that's for me is.
What is the regional identity? Is it the nature of the form or technique?
It's really holistic in the sense that it's usually linked to industry. It's usually linked to what materials actually grow there. So, you know, further north you get wheat, you know, further south you get other things like that. In the Colby regions, it's more wood processing. And that's it. You can tell a lot about how people work and from these objects. And after all, you know, if I can learn how to make basket, I can sort of, I guess, embody the non-objects of it. Like what the object says about people you use it any piece of it. So it's a bit of a house up there.
Did you first basket?
What was my first basket? It was well, I tell you what I did first. It was corn buns. So I don't know. Does anyone know what corn buns are? They're like sort of straw. Is what I do in those. I mean, they're basically little sort of tokens that you read in the field. They have a lot of folklore around them. They're super simple. Whatever kind of leads, but they all have different so there's thousands of you know, and that was not very fast. It was just really nuts in size, but you know, sort of.
Did somebody teach you techniques as you grew up?
I learned most of them books. So yeah, it's books is definitely the way forward. There's not much information online actually. So you've got to plenty of old book stuff. So yeah.
What you meant more convention? Nation is?
I did. I studied first for craft schools or in the United States and along Appalachia are a big part of my education. Which I think is very interesting because I'm from a border town and having this like relationship and look for Appalachia like kind of complicates my identity in some ways. But I took classes first from Pat Pickman, who is not his center, and she makes these so beautiful ones out of cloth, but and very conceptual and material based. And that was the most sad. And then the following took classes at the Feminist Group back with Antoine Grass. He was also a basket weaver and but really identifies as a sculptor. So I feel like I started in using basketry as a sculptural lens on the introduction of my relationship. Baskets.
You do a sudden diligence there, do your game left around during like birthday?
I was in the
What was your experience?
Oh, well, I think it was devastating to the region. We were so up high in my location while I was doing residency at Conference School of Crafts that we experienced a lot of wind damage to homes and tree damage. And those times it was fine. That was where all your pleasure was. And I did in my practice it was really challenging to get the creativity at that time. But I had that with the residency, so I so much my heart is so proud of it. We lost power, the river flood, holidays after dynamite, and just it felt this very. One of my friends here asked me to come in today, some basically and there's like kinds of funny stars and folks are getting access to me, yeah, and just some big heroes that I got to very.
Story narrative, not wanting to your image.
No, not at all. But what came from it in the studio practice was I wanted to connect to my body. Because there are so many things going on. I think that he's seeing was a negative way that I think it was hard to be present in the studio, but I started to leap around my body, so I could focus in the studio on that and push the work in the thinking about the human form. None of those are English show, but it was very important to get to use the full CWC uniforms and see
That really actually wow.
Oh yes, that's so true.
Yeah. I don't feel like that. Yes, you were leading directly onto them. Yeah. I was reading these things and I find it probably good. You know, so then you have to remake it and remake it. You know, so I was making everything without the body. I mean, Megan, my partner there, was the test of it for like these sort of egg shaped classes. But it was yeah, so I think that helps in sort of the breakfast. It's quite interesting. Yeah.
Some stuff where they were actually found in the house yesterday. We were found it.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us about performance in the baskets, how it usually goes at this was.
So the baskets I've made, like they're extensions of a project I did before where we were looking at these sort of archetypal mothers characters where they are very traditional folksy plays that in rural, mostly England, the sunrise in a little bit less sunrise, and we wanted to, well, I want to push the craft aspect of these things, and because through time they have become disconnected from the yearly cycles of that harvest and like the processes of music. So a lot of these costumes are originally been made where using part of that sort of place this is explored. And then as we became more commercialized, people would just buy, a novelty hat or something like that, and go and dance and all that. So it was about a process of bringing back these skilled craft things to have that customer. So performing in baskets is very much about give and take between what the material does and what we want it to do. So you want it to be comfortable, so then you have to learn some techniques that are going to help that. But in the end of the day, it's a solid object, and it isn't always that comfortable. So then I was working with dress makers who would make sort of these smock cloths, which are like padded sort of shoulder pads with basically like a big dress smock. And essentially from many of the German bits that are in there. So, but like I said, we couldn't bring them over yesterday. So I've got a few bits of bruising on me because we didn't have the pad of this, but it was it's amazing how solid those things are. Really quite nice. You can sort of load the head up, very big and all, yes. It's that shout. The way you're describing it is that they really suits normal. It's the way of doing it. The functionality is social and like practical as well. So they are strong.
How do you see the action the people on the street?
I think people really enjoyed it. Yeah, I think well, I hope it's hard to tell what you're going to say, but it's
Did you speak?
We did a bit of speaking, did a bit of running around, did a bit of jumping up and down. It was we definitely found that there was a generational aspect to the response. I think like the older people were definitely intrigued by the material quality of it. But it's also hard to tell because instantly so many people just went out their own selves. So the interactions are a lot more through a lens. So that is interesting as well. But I also think in a big city, everybody else to be a lot more
Yeah, usually when you're performing an event, there's a story, a narrative,
So I've only done it once or twice in that way, but it's I almost, and I was the one not in the Boston, so that was a new. I'm more public master director, so I'm tending to very because the communication is not super easy in those festivals, so it's me subtracting it. But it does work out. There's a narrative, but it's also super loose. That the idea is that actually you're just creating a certain moment in time that is sustained from the service. The narrative helps that because you can say there's a good play or there happens here on this day. It's not it's all kind of hype essentially.
With the original festivals or events when they have food basket.
Depends on the region. So I think if you in Somerset, for instance, where they have really strong basket making tradition, it would be easy for someone to go, oh, I can do that quickly because I can do it. Whereas in Wales or whatever, where there's a more coal mining tradition, and they might dress up in this and coal or something like that. So it's really the materiality is product of the industry, if that's the food today. So I think it's about trying to what is view of how they think.
we didn't have a historic connection. Not we, probably different.
I don't really know, because I think actually handling very hard to keep it outside, because all the Chinese is learned it's not eating on me, so I think you can't believe it, and it's a bit, you will say, because it's one of those things like a lesson, you actually the more you think you know, and then the more you learn, the more you realise I can never learn, you know, so it's it just becomes about sort of like really choosing where you are gonna be able to digest these things, so, you know, narrow down the practice, be to specific materials and techniques that are help to get better, you know.
So are you less interested in inventing? Or
I actually don't think that's possible. In my opinion, like, I don't think it's possible to invent a technique with those materials. I think it's more likely that those techniques have been forgotten and are rediscovered. You know, I guarantee you that Neolithic people were better Basilinas than we are. You know, I guarantee you that historically, Basilia has Eastern. So I think whenever I feel like, oh my god, that's great, I'm doing something new, I'm like, try to remind myself that doing the context of human history and what it just really is.
I really like what Luce is talking about. For me, I was raised on stage farming, and was speaking about creating grid, and for me, material one needs to open to me like fencing or something that can be gained, and at some point I started folding the baskets with cement and mortar, and
which is pretty good.
yes, and if you look at different baskets throughout history, many are covered in pitch or tar, and so it comes back to this like, yeah, nothing is inventing. You know. And I think that way of working is coating the basket, so these structural materials still has that many restraints. But for me, it's that interesting thinking about basketry that are killing and connecting with others. Sure. With the mind. Growing up in South Texas, I was able to cross the border a lot, but you're met with bridges and cement and fencing and different this, navigating movement, and all these pictures of people every day and how it would translate. But she serves there.
There
There are not tunnels, but if you think about the structures of walking through a checkpoint, the fences curve inward so that you are not able to suck over the fences. And so everything was forced, movement was forced, energetic push. And so that's something that to stop.
these bigger groups are as invent what they can sculptures. That may definitely be that.
I don't think of myself as inventing. I think of myself as I like to recreate things in the world through basketry so I can kind of understand how they goes. So sometimes in the studio I'll say them alphabetically is that these certain sizes and herbs and vocabularies sometimes. But then I'll like use it as molds to move around. So I can make a replica of it. And just kind of playing with this idea of what's real, what's not, especially and maybe throwing it where it's back to what is authentic really. And that's been what is like authentic when that is something that instead of for a child to do things with somebody that's
I think the question of design, I guess, and innovation within that is interesting because, like, when you make a basket, it feels much more fire with the material. So you have an end goal in mind. You know what you want to get out of this. You could even have a design, but depending on skill, time, technique, all these different things, you're never going to quite achieve that in the same way that you might be able to with other sort of arts and crafts and materials. So I think like the best way to describe it is almost like you're facilitating the growth of an artifact, so that you are, you have to be present at the moment of the making. You have to be aware of what's been before, and you have to have a sense of future as well. So it's the time travel with things. The modern day sense of design that is a very hard to find to that process because there's the real go wrong and but you feel that directed. You never quite there's never exhausting it, and it's like cooking. Yeah, but it's the best way to describe it. You can always add a bit too much salt, but then there's always something you can do to remedy it. Like one pot cooking is the best analogy for basket.
I love that.
Yeah.
When you're doing a piece of narrative, what's the repetitive process? I was more specific the other parts of it, because there's music on our action.
I think it's about definitely working. I think collaboration is such a big part of like just any everything sort of makes working that thing. I love working with people who do stuff I cannot do, so I think musicians particularly they express their feelings and just like but I can describe to them how I might look to their boss, and then they enter and so I think there's a lot about gigs and the freedom within the context of so yeah, the music was a lot musically, but it's over to you, and I'll say this video like I say not the national years as that
Some people exception, but it basket it is a really expansion.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, it's these like dance. I think again is a really sort of a movement to the body. Possibly is a movement process. Using was a rhythmic process. I think that kind of is ancient embodied things that gays just do. Yeah, and if you can classically use your custom.
I had one kind of loose question, and you've touched on all ways. I'm going to ask you on that. How do you think that will set up?
I think the honest answer is I can see them based on their or and some in the movie throughout the next century of thinking about and relating to my family. Definitely then awareness safety saying the word is spaces your sister, is our ended up their stories and their connecting with them living their growing up in cancer to use abstract abilities. So they are supportive.
Is it important to you that the audience see that?
Not at all. Well, I would like, that's my answer. That's my honest answer. No, I don't want them to see me. I'm not them to see it online, maybe like a portrait of region, but I only know specific or not have it experience. So I know I'm very conscious that what I experience or a culture would sort of that.
You see, you never change that.
I think so because then I rely on it fast because and then as I'm teaching forward, it happens when I make my task. And knowing the identity well. Because brings people that in the research.
I think when I started learning basketball, and very much like that's just not it's not anything to do with me or the something, but again, more you learn techniques and what you're interested in reading basketball, and you start to make these connections between, I guess, you to the landscape. Even the actual techniques, you know, like so which is just maybe an hour away from where I grew up, is probably the heartland of basketball in the UK. It's where they still have will events. And so I guess the more I learned, the more I wanted to specifically reference those techniques and those skills from that region. So it's a way, I guess, of connecting to personal history. But I also think that like any representing practically the space and stuff, yeah, I've been listening to see things that she used to phrases I use it's a thing you pay where you just said that basically it's actually a very small cases, but there's very big distinction in seriousness and you can see what that's significant start and courage and applies to a sunglass houses and that implies some connecting of the best friend. And I like these ideas that we can weave a narrative in objects that can be read and be read by people who are interested in the picture of the object. So, and, you know, I saw you viewer, you have the technique saying upstairs. And like, that's kind of an interesting way of doing it. So, there's definitely a narrative that you're creative and you can't see it, whether you're conscious of it or not. And I guess the better I get at fasting, I think the more conscious I think I'm so. But yeah, definitely more and more see that I just want to really emulate the old boys sunset. Basically, so yeah, that's how it goes.
One more very personal question here in relation to the body. About state.
That's the really true. Yeah. But then it makes it very handy because I don't really have to measure performance because they're usually small. So that's why I'm making some techniques, so I know that there's some so that's kind of why I do it. So
To be scale would be kind of more about play. I like to think about, you know, like the small goal. Already that size. So I relate to the scale in that way. And in the space, there's different scales. One that's very bottom runs, at the size of that's closer. But I do most, the length of my body is about the spot. And then the larger color forms. And then it's a fun challenge. Because I am small. And it's fun to make something so much larger than myself come along and there's a lot of things in the group that becomes larger things.
but I think as well that the techniques you use, it's something interesting about learning when to stop as well, because I guess you have a repeat technique with the yoga, and I mean, you know, especially in not robotic forms, they have a sense of infinity about them. Yes. Yeah, you know when to stop, maybe.
I make the rules as I go along, and I know no around the rules and go down. It really was the how we shoot so in the book.
Yeah.
Because it is very down in hand.
Yeah.
Right? We're leaving. And sometimes they leave for many, many days. And get out and yeah. And then you learn here and then start. And so everything that is around. Easier, nice thing.
How do you find finding baskets in these swans that she would use this bus opposite?
Resistance. I think it's basketry in particular is just expanding at the moment. I think that there's an interest in it because it is something I think everyone has a memory of in people that are accepting or the grocery store or whatever. I mean, there is a texture that's a part of our lives. I think as we sort of live in an increasingly digitized age, and so increasingly separate from news production, I think basketry is a place to reframe and electing and learning of stuff. Particularly in the UK, like it's just in the 80s, when the Basketball Association was formed in the UK, it was near extinction. There was in danger of basketball only but and then since then it's now no longer considered to be anything productive in the UK. Which I think is just an amazing there was this risk. But I think again it just shows you have this huge boom and interest in like classics and new technologies, and then this sort of return to heritage curriculum that are more sustainable and more democratic in a lot of ways, where you are the maker of the object, and I also we both you teach as well, right? Yeah, so we both teach basketry, and I think one of the things you have to get across to people is that function is a real sliding scale. Like we have to people are so encouraged that basket has to be perfect. Like there's this sort of beautification of things, but like 90% of basket weavers in the UK at the time of the is a big deal. It was just good service the job I needed to do, and then come and make another one. And I think it's like if you can do those two things, then you're a basket so I think, and a lot of the time you'll significant use of it as well. So you can only your own pot, weave it, use it, decide it. So lots of boxes of it and you don't have to pay one to use it. So I think it is a little bit of a way to reclaim power for that. It's to have new baskets. So you should.
I think that I think it's because basketball is such a great lesson. Thinking that I did the food and business and bowling and all these really beautiful ways of over something dear and showing something those ancestors that. And I think that because basket's been better to send there's a lot of respect and for guys and love. And so I think we're on a special term to be a physics or society. So it's a place on my list.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really exciting. Like, and especially like, with books like this and like the access to communications across the world, like the impact of different techniques running up against each other and just creating all these possibilities. So I guess innovation is happening by cultural innovation. Techniques that I use with my trying to learn who might be out differently and go. So there's a sense of fun playing that then we'll really system.
So we don't want sex.
I don't watch that in the cinema. I know. I'm very boring. I listen to audiobooks when I read. Yeah, yeah, Charles Dickens or all the classics that I'll never get around to read. So.
What is something unexpected that you really struck into your life or practice?
I was speaking about this after I was saying fast reading has allowed me have confidence in sort of gossip or communication. That's that I feel much more comfortable swimming to make this and throws for different backgrounds because I need them to around my practicing subject material and I feel like we're not thinking sort of the lofty rounds of ideas. Yeah, I mean the duty in line statement but the materials of hardly used as but yeah, it's been really confidence that's very catchy thing like that so that people so it's in a lot of ways before doing yeah, that's just see guy. I like this. Yeah. I'm interested to know about like is there some materials are yeah this year in some sense for days. I was wondering like your process of finding materials. Because I know you sort of do you ever follow stuff?
I don't feel it. I grew up, it was on a 4G section, and I'm sad, be very honest, it's a very suburban experience in the arid coastal desert.
Yes.
And so we had access to is like something that would be very introduced process.
Yeah.
But going back to the term of like how basket you guys classified it, I think that using make is some as the material that the hobbyists and the director for hobbyists is a very important way to access and their income to access the processing back. And so that's really believe that as somebody who's from a income background and like environmental stuff these things that they point and I really like you that as well I think that this is that they born into and then having materials in your art practice and come your way and they become attached to them because of that. But I work really hard to push the material beyond just like hobbyist food price. And so you order a cement, you can really according to the word. And then you got construction.
And I was amazed at how much transformed
Yeah.
the feel because I mean like yeah, I understand obviously baskets but it's you expect them to do a certain thing because and like you like really I think that's like interesting like super structure so yeah
And
with very basic materials
yeah, and I think also like kind of how thinking about like Chabon art in Texas that a lot of his talk is about like accessible materials and using optic and so it's how water and this and that and as well. Everything that I use is very accessible to me in any region that I try to, but where I try to bring in this question of the region or the element of the actual was the functionality. And so that's the insect lens we practice and as is a part of indigenous natural dye practices in Mexico, but it's also a part of globalization as it is a dye that is shipped around a lot during colonization. And so that's always like the last layer of color and anything that's below the heat. And the questions or like complicates that into like regionality or optimism. So the mashup of all of these materials. Yeah, and that's
Yeah, I think again at the moment, looking at the audience, and you have
you can know the woman function. And the more and the more you see what you are.
Okay, but big form and function are a big part of it, but I think it's how form and function are dictated by, I guess, the global illicit sense of what they need to do. You know, so function is about expanding a definition on, so yes, you know, mining into carry X from there to there, but it's about who's going to be doing that, why did you got time of year, how will that change the design? Yeah, so I think there's a lot of that speculative design in it, and so I think form and function, and I think the problem would be fun. You know, I think it's about how you could get sense of way into things that need to be.
This function's a big part of your practice.
I think it is. Yeah,
It is?
I think it should. I think it should be for any partner. You know, I think art without function isn't really.
You have to say Japanese baskets. It's form. Japanese basket weaving, I didn't see. The Japanese basket.
Just this form only.
Well, the Abbeys in 2017, they donated it for Japanese basket weaving. It was a pretty amazing exhibition. I have a friend who is a contemporary basket and she said that Itanana allows you to only find functional as long as you can fit what anything that it's the
I'm all about form. I'm never thinking about function. But function for me is the storytelling and the conversation we get to have about the work and about all the materials talking to each other. But for me, it's about form and the third F. That's fun. So for building, for me, is very fun, and that's what keeps me interested in making work. That question is, well, that thing over there, like this entire scaffolding, okay, like what if I wove that out of a basket and covered it in mortar? How structural will it be? And that's what keeps me making things.
How do we see your work?
Oh yeah,
Here?
it's
Just upstairs,
so
yeah.
the
Thanks.
Level 6.
like the car.
Okay, so then to see. Thank you.
Makes the pen so proud. We don't need to be work and do that.
What I need, what it's me. Yeah. Well, I'm the nerd that plays the placard before they go into the art exhibition, so I do appreciate them. But it's my intention that first, that you do not need it anyway, and then it just is crafted to the form and the textures and the colors, and then it will inspire to want to know more, and then hopefully have a conversation and see if they have it there later. But the story for me is a big part of why I made the narrative. So I hope we would get to the narrative first at a later date.
I think because a lot of classes when they are, I guess, people inhabit them and then they don't. You know, so when they're on display, like they are upstairs on those parts, they become inert. You know, they become functionless, and I think I really enjoy when people try to cite what is that? How does it work? You know, this is obviously a handle, or this has some kind of function, but I can't work out what it is unless I see it in action. So I really like this idea that the function reveals itself over time. You know? So I would be using a bit of that process if I explain too much. So I like basket. Any kind of basket is the band is a really good example of that because it's those are designed in the skirts to be worn, but you've got more broader, perfectly useful vineyard basket. You make stuff in there, so they're just sort of containers in the same way. So function is very specific to the person, and I wouldn't like to dictate too much how people get together to use this. So.
Personally, I think young fascinating and eating more. I can do more question coming out of this. That you guys are also like bangers, children. I said not like functional art, language, American stuff. There. The university I you like very attractive and how that he did. And then work in self portrait. I thought was super interesting. You like some of you do projects. Various as known art is a stuff with it's like it does all some senses and there's other things like investigating there you share it and then never do that.
Well, yeah, it's of course. Okay. So in the sense, what I said about the excitement of fashion use on the other, I guess on the flip side, there's the risk of commercialization of technique. And I guess it's a balance between obtaining these heritage regional with local practices, and then how we play with them on a further scale. But I think. The basket making community tends to divvy itself up into two camps, where you have the artist basket maker who is not so concerned with the rules as such, and then there are the heritage basket makers who have much more of an anthropological and a sense of recreating functional everyday goods, folk craft stuff, which I think is great. But they do I think there is a push and a pull at all this more sensitive days. Didn't necessarily see any negatives, but I do think that what will come out of it, I hope, is that people are a little bit more discerning about their goods. One of the problems is that if we live in a consumer culture, you're used to buying the things that every basket that we see on the street is made by hand. Like there are many machines that make baskets, and a lot of people don't know that. So I think it's interesting then that if you're buying a basket for $3, that's probably been made by somebody who's not taking it for a labor. I think the more we demand certain goods and this kind of stuff, as long as we have a sense that actually they are made by people, it's like, so I guess that's the negative that I can see happening is that there is an inherent exploitation of them too, right. But it's the same.
I'm not seeing it right now, and the question to me sounds like those future basketry in some ways. And I just feel like that's what's gonna be basket. They're gonna be holding, they're gonna be carrying, they're gonna be helping transport and be a vehicle for me and so I think that's what I wrote about basketry, that it is writing the song for years and stuff a lot of ships. Like, you just kind of
like a straight book, it's like a history of European basketry, and it gets to this point where it's about 1860, something like that, and it goes, basket making has been affected by commercial, and then it's like there's nothing more we can do, and then it's like from there it's declining, you know. So it's quite interesting to see how that'll change, but yeah. So I think that there's you know, as materials change and stuff, I mean, we're all sort of discovering ourselves how, you know, these wonder materials that we thought were going to change the world are actually probably not as good as we thought, and maybe some of these older crafts actually have benefits that we were maybe a bit too quick to ditch, because it's interesting to see how that those two interact. Yeah, I think of course I did a lot with the writers, how the old music baskets, and so I think I can see a lot of hybridization happening in each text that the
No, you can't think about the kid after your nice. Absolutely.
I like the community.
Because they combine to making things again. You look at history, machines, and back to reading and making objects of the it's
Interesting, yeah. I mean, I guess I think my critique is good up there, as you have the romanticize things, you know. I think
You're romanticizing things. They do it.
okay, well, yeah, no, I'm not sure. I guess for me, it's about trying not to be too revivalist about it. And it's about these materials can be used in a modern context. I didn't want it to be cost-carry, I didn't want it to be, you know, Renaissance, but
Everything's been done and you do it different.
yeah, well, you're like,
So
and context is the important, factor, I think, yeah. So, essentially. I think I'm just biased, but I didn't really like
Do you consider yourself both a readable, like carrying on the traditions or the history of basketry, or do you look at yourself as contemporary artists? And does it make a difference? And when we talk about context, I think that's sort of the about is that something that is important to your identity, or you just like put yourself in wherever there's an opportunity? I did see myself as both a contemporary artist and sharing the tradition of acting. You could be editing there, you could be poet on some of my life, and sharing the basketry techniques in the context of thinking about building and structure, I think is really important to me. But I can also, I see myself as a contemporary artist in that if I at some point desire to make a shift in my practice, I want to not feel married for life to sculptural basketry. I think whatever feels of interest, I want to call it that set, and have that faded and in my identity, which is always in flux and is that keeping in it. So that's where I see myself in relationship to the but I do feel very grounded in textiles in general. Method, my background in education. So that's where I feel after on science and
everyone who's watching it, and she must know, so everyone it's you know, having two disciplines to be an artist and to conceptual to be so I feel like personally I think it's about taking those two things with a pinch of salt and finding your own way through those two, but I definitely feel very strongly plugged into heritage basketball, but I also, you know, I guess in some ways a little bit embarrassed as well by the fact that, you know, that this isn't my, I'm not a making my income off of selling baskets on the street, this kind of stuff. So I think there's an element of I have the freedom to be an artist, so I'm gonna push that in a way that I want to as well. So yeah, I think you find that you've struggled in terms of identifying because it's quite medium, it's strange. I mean, the contemporary art world was not that familiar. Yeah, so it's very specific to that area that you feel. Yeah, I guess I feel I looked a bit at both, but yeah, you never quite enough to say this where I'm seeing it. So yeah.
And I want to add to that the American craft community has been so supportive to my writing, and craft in the United States is definitely an identity that I am a part of. I think as soon as a craft works, regions are also identified as a region of words, and somehow I'm pointed to find footing or acceptance in both. And I think that's a really beautiful aspect of like how supportive the arts community is in the US.
I think this is a nice place to finish. I have to say, I forgot to say at the beginning, which is that there are 10 copies of this book here, and they are for sale. You can buy them through Stephen Passport.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.